Abigail, this is Nico, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
We are joined by author John David Anderson.
Mr. Anderson has written the Stowaway series, The Greatest Kid in the World, Post-it,
Miss Bixby's Last Day, Riley's Ghost, One Last Shot,
Sidekicked, Granted, and more.
Thank you for being with us.
We really
Thank you very much
appreciate
for having me. Yeah, no, this is great. I'm looking forward to it.
You write children's books. How are your books influenced by your own childhood?
Well, part of it is that when I was a kid, I was not very well supervised. So I spent a lot of time on my own, playing outside, out in the woods, wandering around, getting into all kinds of trouble and mischief. And as a result of that, I would sort of live inside my own head, and I would create characters, and I would replay my favorite movies and my favorite books that I was reading, and I would actually be those characters from those books. And as a result of that, I just started telling a whole bunch of stories. And so I think part of that, that sort of imagination that I built up when I was young, it feeds into the stories I tell. But at the same time, I had struggles. I had trauma and drama. I'm sure you guys have some trauma and drama. Maybe not. Maybe you have awesome, perfect lives. I hope you do. But things happen. And when they do, they kind of get lodged up in your head. And so when I go back to write a book and I think about a time in my life when, there was strife or there was a problem and I had to learn something to overcome it, a lot of times I go back to my childhood, right? So those two things.
How do you come up with these ideas for your books?
Well, I mean, are you two engaged in anything creative? Do you like to write or dance or make videos or anything like that?
I like to make comics.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I like to write. I pretend to write stories. I write stories for my own.
All right, so where do you come up with your ideas?
Well, my friend Edwin, he's he had this idea called Joe, and then I made him part of the FBI.
Well, for me, when I would write, I would just
Nice.
I would think of a setting first, and then I would write, well, what's this gonna be about, and name a character and write its emotions and stuff, and that's how I get my ideas.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, ideas come from lots of different places. And I do the same thing that both of you do. Number one, like I'll take an idea that I see out there in the world that maybe hasn't been explored enough, and I'll find a way to twist it, right? And make it my own, like making somebody part of the FBI, right? Or the book behind you, Sidekicked. There are a lot of superhero stories, but there weren't a whole lot of superhero sidekick stories. And I thought, well, why not explore that angle a little bit? But then on the other hand, yeah, sometimes I do. I just start with a setting or a character, mostly a character. And I do think about the emotions, and I think about the problems that this character is going through. And I'm like, what does that character want more than anything else in the world, right? And what is it going to take for them to get that? And what are all the terrible things that I can throw in their way that are going to make this very hard for them? Because the more conflict, the harder it is you can make for your character to get what they want, the more exciting the book is, right? If you had a book with a character who's like, I want a pony, and on page 2 it's like, and then he got a pony, you'd be like, boy, that story really stunk, right? It was terrible. But if he has to fight a Tyrannosaurus Rex in order to get the pony, well, now, then you're onto something.
Can you tell us something about a time where you were doing something and noticed someone or something and thought, I need to put that in a book?
Yeah. That happens all the time. Doesn't that happen to you? Like you see something, like you watch a movie or you see something out in the world, or somebody says something kind of funky or a good joke, and you're like, yeah, that's totally going in there. I have 2 kids. They just graduated from high school. They're about to go to college. But of course, I raised them and I watched them grow up. And so I'm always stealing things from their lives and throwing them into books. But sometimes you just get this like little flash of inspiration. One example is the book Posted, which is also behind you. I woke up one day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I just had an image of a Post-it note in my head. And the Post-it note said, "I'm sorry" on it. And I did what any writer does. I'm curious, right? So I asked questions, and I asked these questions. I was like, all right, who wrote the note? Who did they give it to? What did they do that they were sorry about? And why did they use a Post-it note? And by the time I had answered those 4 questions, believe it or not, I actually had this sort of full-fledged idea for this novel. So I think it's important. Like what you guys are getting at was really awesome, which is that, if you like to create things, if you're an artist or a writer or anything like that, you have to keep your eyes open because there are so many amazing, fascinating, interesting, and terrible things going on in the world that if we just sort of watch out for them and then write them down, we can turn them into really good stories.
What is your process when putting a book together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
I start at the beginning, at least. I know that. I always start with a problem. I always start with the character who has the problem. And then I just kind of go. I'm a bit of a pantser, so I don't plan very much. I never do an outline or anything like that. And then hopefully, when I am about halfway through and I've got all these threads and all these problems going together, and all of a sudden my character's got to figure out a way out of this, that's when I really need inspiration to strike me and think like, how are we going to wrap this up? How are we going to tie all these threads? And most of the time it works. And sometimes you just have to keep writing until you get to that point. So I would say I definitely write the first half, just going on the train. And then about that point, I pull out the map and I look at the final destination and I try to figure out how to get there.
After you finish your first draft, how much do you revise the book?
You don't want to know. I mean, oh man, it is terrible. I have to revise my books because my first drafts, they're junk, right? I write the worst first drafts, I think, of any author in history. And so it takes like 8 or 9 revisions before I can actually whip this thing into shape. And sometimes within a revision, I'll make something like 7,000 or 8,000 changes. So you can do the math, right? If you're doing 8 revisions and you're making like 8,000 changes, like 64,000 changes to a book, and the book's only 70,000 words long, right? So it's almost like you're changing every single word. And revision is tough. Like that's probably the hardest part of the process for me. But you keep at it. You don't give up because it gets better each and every time. So that's always one piece of advice that I give to young authors is just when you think you're done, right? When you get to the end, that's when you're just getting started.
Like with many authors, it took you a long time from when you first wrote a book to getting published.
Can you tell us about that journey?
Sure. So, I mean, my journey actually started a really long time ago. I knew I wanted to be a novelist back when I was 17 years old. And I didn't get my first novel published until I was 30, right? So that's a 13-year journey. But in that time, I went to college and I went to graduate school and I majored in literature. And so as a result of that, I got to read a ton of books, right? Thousands upon thousands of books, which is the best education you can get if you want to be an author. And then I got to practice and I just kept writing and writing and writing. And it was actually my 4th full-fledged novel that even got published. And then even after that, it was another 5 years before I got my second book published. And that was the one that kind of put me on the map. So not only was it a struggle, but it was a learning experience. And each thing that I wrote, everything that I write, actually teaches me something new about the craft. And every book that I read teaches me something new about writing as well. So, I mean, it's a journey that I don't think you ever get done with.
When a child reads one of your books, what do you hope they will get out of it?
That is a great question. Have you read any of my books?
Riley's Ghost?
Yeah. So I will tell you, this is what I hope you get out of my books. Obviously, it's different for each book. But the first thing I want you to do is I want you to laugh or cry or get excited or something like that. I want you to have some kind of emotional response to the book, right? Because that's what keeps you turning the pages. If it's Riley's ghost, I hope you get a little scared. If it's sidekicked, I hope you get a little energized, right? If it's finding Orion, I hope you laugh a little bit. So first step, right? Get you engaged, get you sort of to empathize or sympathize with the characters. But then I'll be honest, there are points in my book where I want you to think. I want you to question. I want you to question why the characters do what they do. I want you to question, would I do that if I was in that situation? I want you to think about like the impact they have on the world that they're in and see if you can't translate that some way to be like, well, how can I have an impact on the world that I'm in? Because I think that's one of the powerful things that books can do for us is it can then empower us to have agency in our own lives.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Well, who's your favorite writer? Do you have one?
Um,
Either of you?
I'd say Jeff Kinney.
Maybe
Ah,
Dave Pilkey.
all right. Yeah. We like the funny stuff, I see. Me too. I also like the funny stuff. But my funny stuff when I was a kid was more like Dr. Seuss and Nate the Great, right? And Beverly Cleary. So I always loved them. But I would have to, if I had to pick one author who's had the biggest influence on me, it'd probably be Kurt Vonnegut Jr., who writes adult books like Slaughterhouse-Five and Cat's Cradle and Breakfast of Champions. But he's also funny in his own way, right? He writes satire, which means he kind of makes fun of and mocks things in society. But he also just like opened my eyes to the things that can be done with a book and just the power that literature can have. But I think, we all have heroes. We all have people that we admire for how they do what they do. And, there doesn't go like a week when I don't read something that somebody else has written and I'm be like, wow, that is phenomenal, right? That is so much better than anything I could ever write. And that just makes me want to be a better writer.
You gave us a piece of advice already. What other advice do you have for young people who want to write?
So I mean, I've given a couple pieces of advice. One I'll definitely emphasize is that if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader first. And every writer I've ever met will agree with this, right? The more you read, the more you understand how stories are put together, the more you learn about how language is put together. And so the better your own stories will be. The other thing I would say is experiment, right? Dabble. Don't just write the same kind of thing over and over again. It's cool that you like to make comic books, right? But also try your hand at poetry. You never know, right? Write a short story. Work with somebody to create something, like a graphic novel or something like that. Because I think the more you experiment, the more you see how all these things pretty much use the same tools over and over again. We use things like character and setting and conflict and plot to make our stories, to drive them along. So that's what I would say. I would read as much as possible, experiment with your writing, try a lot of different things, and just write every day, just a little bit, even if it's only 10 minutes.
That's big advice.
Do you also have a smaller tip? Something you do when you are writing?
That maybe people
yeah.
don't.
No, I totally have a smaller tip. Eat chocolate. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, when you've been sitting there for 5 or 6 hours typing away on your keyboard and you've written at least a few good pages, you deserve to reward yourself. And that's how I reward myself, is with a piece of Trader Joe's dark chocolate sea salt with caramel, which is amazing stuff.
Do you have any other projects in the works that you can tell us about?
So my latest book just came out. It was called The Greatest Kid in the World, and it is available in bookstores now. It is about a kid who is probably not the best. He definitely gets in trouble. He makes mischief, and he gets invited to take place in the Greatest Kid in the World competition. And he basically has 1 week to convince like the rest of America that he's the greatest kid, when in fact he has no idea how to be a good kid. And as you can imagine, things do not go well. I am also working on a book that I'm hoping will come out next year. And there's not much I can say about it, except it is about a brother and his older sister and their relationship and sort of the conflicts that they have. And it's very much about siblings, because I haven't had a chance to really write about those yet. And I think it's going to be pretty funny.
Finally, it's time for Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Number 1. What is your favorite phrase to use?
Inconceivable.
Number 2. What is one subject you love to learn more about?
I actually like to learn most about science.
Number 3. What is your go-to snack food?
Go-to snack food, Pringles, definitely.
Number 4. What is your favorite book growing up?
My favorite book growing up. So when I was a little kid, it was Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss, about Tweedlebeetles and all that stuff. And when I got a little older, it was The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander.
Number 5. If you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Hawaii.
Number 6. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Do dishes by snapping my fingers.
Number 7. What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote and all those guys.
Number 8. What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Ooh, that's a good one. Obviously I have to say read, because, that's pretty much a favorite activity almost all the time. But I'm also going to say play board games with my family.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
That is not an easy question to answer. Who would they be? Let's go with Stephen King, Albert Einstein, and somebody just goofy, somebody like off the wall. Let's go with Darth Vader.
Number 10. What's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
The best piece of advice I was ever given, and I don't know that it was ever explicitly stated to me, but my parents always encouraged me to follow my dreams. Even though, there's not always a great future in writing for everyone, and it's a hard gig to get into, they always push me to do that. So I appreciate that from them. And I would say the same thing to anybody else. If you've got a dream, if you have something you want to do and share with the world, have the courage to stand up and share it.
You were awesome.
And thank you for spending this time with us.
We can't wait to read your future books.
Awesome. Well, it was great for you to have me. Thank you very much.